Hello, hello. Today we're going over the week 4 matchup graphs. We got quarterbacks, running backs, and then receivers, going over all three. So stick around, like and subscribe if you'd like. If you don't like it, then okay. Quarterbacks first. Starting off with Kyler Murray, one of my favorite players. He's the quarterback 5 right now, and if you don't notice, he is all the way on the right, which is a great sign because he's going against Washington. They are by far the worst in the NFL. They were 32nd last year, I keep saying it, and they are 32nd by a mile this season. The quarterbacks they have played so far: Baker Mayfield, Daniel Jones, and Joe Burrow. And there's no bye weeks, so it's out of 32 quarterbacks. What have they been? Well, Baker was the quarterback 2, Daniel Jones quarterback 6, Burrow quarterback 6. So you have the quarterback 5 going against that defense. It shouldn't be that hard. He's going to dominate. Next up is Jaden Daniels on the opposite side of that matchup. He's in the green. I don't know what to think about this matchup. It's one of those where it's a small sample size because there's two sides of it. One, the Cardinals were projected to be the worst defense in the NFL at the start of the season, but they've kind of been more in the middle. They're rushing against quarterbacks. The numbers aren't good, but that's because Josh Allen had 2 rushing touchdowns against them. The touchdowns really weight that, especially when it's a 3-game sample size. When you're looking at the yards, they're about average. Passing, they're about average. They play a ton of zone coverage, which isn't good for a rushing quarterback. So the design work should be there, but it's more middle of the pack. But at the same time, they're projected to be the worst in the NFL. So I'm not a believer in the Arizona defense. So still very much fine with Jaden Daniels. The next quarterback, Joe Burrow, in this green area, matches up extremely well against coverage. So first off, I just want to point out, they only play one high safety for the most part. Like, they barely play any too high, which is the norm in the NFL right now. You play soft coverage, you play 2 high safeties. They really only play one, and it's one of their best players, and he is out. And the guy that they have replacing him is Nick Scott, who was horrible last year. Like, one of the worst safeties in the NFL, and he played on the Bengals. So Joe Burrow probably had to watch him in film, get burnt toast every single week, and now he gets to play against that. A one high safety look a ton of the time, which is what Joe Burrow is best against. Quarterback 2 against cover 3, against 2 high safeties. He's like middle of the pack. They have T. Higgins back, played basically every single snap last week. Jamar Chase on the other side, like, that's what they're best against. So he just matches up really well. And then you also have to think, like, Dalton's on the other side. This isn't a horrible offense on the other side anymore. And the Bengals defense is atrocious. So I don't think it's going to be a blowout. Like, the Bengals are 0-3. If they blew out the Panthers, I'd be shocked. Next guy up in this same area, almost in the green, is Caleb Williams. The volume isn't the problem. Shane Waldron's going to throw 1,000 times. Everything over from week 1 to week 2 to week 3 have increased. The efficiency, the volume, like everything you can imagine, it keeps going up and up. And now it gets to the Rams defense. They're 31st against the pass. They have not been good. Looking at the last 2 weeks, Kyler Murray, quarterback 1, and Brock Purdy, without basically all of his weapons, quarterback 5. So he's set up perfectly. It's one of those where he is slowly adjusting, and then last week he played a bad defense and he took off. It wasn't the greatest day in terms of the overall offense, but in fantasy numbers and just passing yards, it was great. Stroud is also in a bounce back spot here. Jacksonville has just been so horrible. And again, I'll say it, I don't know what they're doing with their defense. They're playing a ton of man coverage, and Stroud as a downfield passer, explosive play passer, like, that is just perfect for him. Nico Collins, that's his strength over Stephon Diggs. Diggs is definitely, he's one of those rare guys that is actually better versus zone coverage compared to man. Just isn't the normal for a fantasy receiver. So Nico Collins is definitely the better play out of those two, like normal. But last year already, Stroud averaged 26 points per game in his 2 starts against Jacksonville. I would expect it to be similar this week. Fields is interesting. Where is he on this? Yeah, right in this yellow area. The rushing volume's been lower, which is shocking. Not even interesting, just shocking, because Arthur Smith is there. I thought that he would be running more than ever, and he already ran way more than he did in college, which I don't think people realize. But the passing has been extremely efficient. Again, shockingly. But the rushing volume hasn't really been there. But in this matchup, the Colts have been so bad, and they're already banged up in the secondary. That's what makes Fields like actually playable now, is the efficiency over the volume, which is insane to say. Never thought I would ever say that, especially with the weapons they have there. but they got toasted by Caleb last week, like I said, the Colts defense. So usually I wouldn't love Fields in this spot, but the Colts defense has been bad enough and they're injured enough where it's actually a fine play. The left side of this graph, starting off with Baker against Philly, they actually haven't been as bad against quarterbacks as you'd think. I'm sure a ton of people played Derek Carr last week thinking last year's Eagles and even the first 2 weeks Eagles, they weren't amazing, but right around average. The good thing is Philly shuts down the run completely, and Tampa Bay can't run the ball anyways, especially if Bucky is dealing with a hamstring injury. Don't trust Rashad White against the Philly D-line. So they're not going to be able to run, in my opinion. Lots more volume. Godwin does have an incredible matchup just in the slot. Mike Evans on the outside, still perfectly fine. Overall, an okay matchup, but I don't think it's the perfect matchup that everyone might think it is for Baker Mayfield. Geno, very similar. Again, like Philly, Detroit stops the run. They're number 1 against the run, so the volume, which again, surprising. Look at how high he is on the volume. He's number 8 on the week in terms of projected volume. So great offense on the other side. Probably won't be able to run a bunch. Volume is there. Overall, I think he's a good play this week. Mahomes, it looks like 2023 is repeating. I thought he bounced back in general, and I still think he does. I didn't think he'd be a top 3 quarterback. I still had him below that. But I don't think he's going to be quarterback 12 again, and it's looking like he might be, which is shocking. The Chargers' offense is in shambles right now. They don't have either offensive tackle. They probably don't have Justin Herbert. So that is the main problem, which obviously he doesn't have any control over that. It's not even on the defense for the Chargers, but I just don't know if they're even going to be able to score a ton. So he might be screwed this week just because of that alone, and Chargers don't have a bad defense in general. Running backs, it's kind of funny. All of the guys with higher volume have horrible matchups this week. There's barely anybody in the green this week. So starting on the top left this time, the higher floor, lower ceiling compared to their normal. Stevenson and Mason going against each other, very similar. Stevenson, I wish he got more receiving volume right now. Part of it is just because they're not throwing. It's not that he's not getting the target share. They're not throwing. Jacoby Brissett doesn't have the volume right now. So overall, it's a really tough matchup. And what could be a blowout, it's at San Francisco, a must-win game for them. They're 1-2. The Patriots offense, don't trust it after last week against the Jets. Very similar. So if you need to play him, he's got hope. Like, he's probably going to be more touchdown dependent, but also he scored 0.3 points last week, I think. If he scored like 5 this week, I wouldn't be shocked. Mason is the opposite. Still a hard matchup, but he's at home. It should work himself out because the volume, they're favored. Overall, I'm not overly worried. It's one of those where it's a tough matchup, but he's set up a lot better. Dobbins versus Kansas City. Again, no offensive tackles, no quarterback. The touchdown upside is very limited. He's not going to get receiving. Kansas City is second against running backs. Like, it's a really hard start in general. Swift, that was Frankie meowing if you didn't hear. Swift, more Roshan is the rumor, which isn't good. And then they come out and announce that Khalil Herbert is the goal line back. He's had like 8 carries this year. 4 of them have been inside the 10. It's just not good for him in general. The receiving is what could eventually save him. Caleb, though, he's not the guy that's going to be the check down guy. Like, he scrambles a ton. Scrambling quarterbacks and check downs are very negatively correlated. So the hope for DeAndre Swift in general isn't great. And the matchup, pretty average overall. Rams a lot worse against the pass than they are against the run. Hubbard, the matchup, that is one of those things where it says it's worse than Swift. I don't think so. The Bengals D-line is atrocious right now because they're all injured. I don't know how it happened, what they're doing in the doctor's office over there, but they're leading the NFL in missed tackles. They're 27th in yards before contact. It's just not good overall as an NFL defense line compared to the fantasy numbers that they've actually given up. So Hubbard, it's not a talent play. I personally don't believe in the talent. Like, there's a reason they drafted Jonathan Brooks after Hubbard last year, giving him a ton of touches and not really being very efficient. But the volume and the matchup makes him a play for me. In that same game, Moss has been extremely efficient. I wasn't a huge believer in him preseason because we've seen this time and time again, that backup guy that kind of gets the volume most of the time on a new team, very similar to like Zamir White this season or Rico Dowdle, Alexander Madison, like those guys. Moss has not been that. Insanely efficient so far. Overall good offensive line. They lost their right tackle. I'll tell you a secret, their backup right tackle is probably better. They drafted him in the first round. That's the reason that they haven't really been playing him, is he's played 0 games in his career. So now week 3, he comes in, did better than the offensive tackle on the right side that has been struggling a ton. Their worst guy by far. So overall, offensive line, plenty fine. The game script he hasn't had. They're 0-3. The Panthers, I would hope that they have the game script that fits them better. And also, I don't think people have talked about this. At least I haven't seen it. He has dominated the carries. I think everyone knows that. He's dominated the snaps. Everyone kind of assumed that even if Zach Moss was going to be the guy getting 70% of the snaps, which is getting like 80, then Chase Brown would be the receiving back. That hasn't even been true. The targets this year are Zach Moss has 11, Chase Brown has 6. So overall, very, very well set up. Henry, one of those weird things where it's a 3-week sample size. So Buffalo, they're 30th against running backs. It's kind of tough to believe that. They are 3rd in yards before contact allowed, which is Baltimore's strength. So that doesn't really bode well for him. It's one of those things where the main thing here, stat, they are 10th against rushing running backs, which is obviously Derrick Henry. 31st against receiving running backs. So that's mainly why they're over here. So I would take that with a very, very small grain of salt. They haven't been as good in fantasy as they have been in real life. Achane up here, I get a lot of questions about him in general just because the quarterback situation. He only needs one play. If Thompson were to sit, or Boyle, hopefully he doesn't play either, he's maybe even worse somehow, that would be the dream goal. Huntley is by far the best quarterback there. He's a Pro Bowl quarterback, of course. So I hope that he plays for Achane's sake. But even if he doesn't, okay matchup, still think I don't see myself ever sitting Achane. I have him in my main league, and I'm going to start him. Barkley, the interesting matchup here. Included it on the TikTok stats, but 31st against receiving backs. Tampa Bay is really good against running backs in general. So it's kind of lying here to an extent because they have a really good rushing front. They had an amazing rushing defense last year. Same thing. But they play a ton of zone coverage, which basically just means that they're going to contain Hurts. It's not going to be man where Hurts can take off and run. And against zone coverage, that's where you see a lot more of those checkdowns. That's softer zone coverage. You check down the running back. And then you also think, well, they don't have A.J. Brown. They don't have Devontae Smith. They don't have anybody. So it's one of those where Saquon is a good receiving running back. My one worry about Saquon before the season was, he's not really going to get receiving. Jalen Hurts, that scrambling rushing quarterback like I've talked about. Usually they don't check down. Even DeAndre Swift's targets dropped a ton, and he's more of that receiving back. Saquon comes in. So far, he's gotten really good targets. Some of that's design, which is even better. So Saquon, that receiving is what's going to be big for him this week. Rushing volume, a little shaky, but receiving should be dominant this week. Receivers, starting off with the shadows, as always. So guys that are shadowed, following them around the field wherever they go, 95% of the time. Garrett Wilson is going to have Surtain. I'll talk about that in a second. Pittman and Joey Porter Jr. for the Steelers, Ayuk and Christian Gonzalez, Olave and A.J. Terrell, Jefferson and Alexander from the Packers. Overall, Wilson, ton of questions just because their Surtain shadow is pretty horrible. He is number 1 in projected targets. Still, he has a 29% target share despite being shadowed by some of the great corners, horrible matchups throughout 3 weeks, even worse matchup in week 4. So a ton of questions about him. I would say that he is more like that flex play. It's just hard to bench a guy that you draft in the second round and hasn't been bad, at least. He's not been great in fantasy, but he still looks good. And Surtain, it's a really tough matchup. So the situation that I would bench him in is if I have 3 solid wide receiver 2s or better, then I'll consider you play the matchups from there. So I don't think he's a must sit just because Surtain's on him. It's just he's not going to have that ceiling game, kind of like this says perfectly, higher floor because of the volume, but still lower ceiling overall. One point out, Olave played A.J. Terrell in college in that Clemson game, destroyed him. A.J. Terrell's been insane ever since. I don't know if Olave fixed him, but that'll be interesting to watch. Again, Saints and Falcons, they play each other twice a week. Ayuk versus Gonzalez, same thing as Wilson, Ayuk in the same situation. Not the greatest matchups. He's been better as an NFL receiver than fantasy receiver. Even last week, Jennings and his expected points were right about even. Jennings blew past it. Ayuk was way under it. That's eventually going to even out to the mean. And then Ayuk, he had same thing. Sometimes it's just luck. He had 2 deep balls that were pass interferences Great for the NFL, fantasy, it means nothing. So again, bad matchup for him this week, but still completely confident in him and Wilson after this week going forward. Hill, another guy that everyone kind of asks questions right below Wilson, kind of being blocked by that high floor, low ceiling label. Still think he's a flex at worst with Thompson. If Thompson doesn't play, then I think he's like a must start, like he's Tyreek Hill. Same thing, like he's a first round pick. Thompson's just been horrible, but still Tyreek Hill. Same as like Achane, you need one play. Waddle is more that guy that I'm more concerned about. They are both going to be against L'Jarius Sneed. He is not projected to shadow, so that is better for Hill, worse for Jalen Waddle. Adams should be better off if he has Aiden O'Connell. It does not look like Aiden O'Connell is going to start again. Wouldn't be shocked if he came in halfway through the game. But last year, he had 11 targets per game with O'Connell. Gardner Minshew so far hasn't been the most perfect quarterback for him in general. Johnson, my baby. Deontay. 14 targets last week with Thielen. 45% first read target share on 37 attempts from Dalton. The outside corners don't really scare you. They aren't bad, but they don't really scare you, and they don't allow a ton of explosive plays, which usually when I talk about that, like it's a negative thing if they don't do that. But for Deontay's sake, like he's not like that deep downfield play. Like he's not like the dominant yak guy that's looking for those explosive plays. So it's not a ton of a problem. Like they don't pressure the quarterback right now. I talked about their defensive line. They're last in pressure rate. So Deontay, getting those first read targets, those simple throws, I think it's just going to be a huge PPR day for him as long as he is healthy. He said he's going to play. We'll see if that's true. Moore and Odunze, I'm very high on in general. Season long, I know it hasn't worked out totally up until last week, but even DJ Moore, like the volume is up here. I think he's number 12. His targets have been like 8, 10, and 10. And then Odunze dominated last week. He had the number 3 volume, the number 1 air yards by a mile. I was watching the game, and every single play, it just seemed like they were chucking it deep to Rome Odunze. I love the talent. He's one of those guys in the preseason where I wasn't confident on him in redraft. It was one of those where it's like, hey, maybe don't draft him, but halfway through the season, trade for him. And now he's already doing it in week 3. He was one of those dynasty guys I loved, but not as much in redraft. And this is the reason why. Keenan Allen is out. That would be big. So that's kind of like, do I play him or not? Is Keenan Allen playing? Because the matchup is incredible. They're going to get Tre'Davious White half the time. The Rams, they're worse than this 27th ranking against receivers, in my opinion. Like, they've been so bad. So I really like this matchup. Jennings, it's an interesting one. Him and Ayuk, obviously I'd rather play Ayuk, but the matchup favors Jennings more, actually. So they are 9th against outside receivers, and they are 29th against slot receivers. Jennings is going to play out of the slot. The big thing for him is Debo playing. If Debo plays, like, I don't want to mess with Jennings, but if he doesn't play, like, I don't mind playing Jennings in the flex this week. Overall, a really good matchup. Metcalf and JSN, they are right on top of each other. The targets are definitely more valuable for DK Metcalf. Terry Arnold is going to be on the Alabama corner, rookie. He's played solid so far. Like, obviously, like, he's a rookie cornerback. He's been average numbers, so it's not like something that's a big factor. But he hasn't been a rookie cornerback that's been bad. He's kind of lived up to the hype to a decent level so far. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. They're in 2 different spots. One, obviously, is going to be on the outside, and then Chris Godwin's going to be in the slot. He has the number 1 advantage in targets this week. He has the number 2 matchup overall out of the slot. Philly, last against the slot on the season. It's just been not good for them going against slot receivers. Outside, they haven't been bad. Against the pass, I said, they haven't been horrible. But Chris Godwin has definitely set up the best, and the volume that he's gotten, the production that he's gotten so far in that new role has been amazing. I really like him this week. Amari Cooper, up in this top right. Never thought I'd see that because I think the first 3 weeks he was down in the bottom left. But the volume was there last week. Overall, pretty efficient. I don't trust him, I will say that. But it's a Raiders revenge game. They are 31st against receivers. But I will say that about even against outside receivers. They're last against the slot. I lied. Godwin's 31st against the slot. They are last, the Raiders, against the slot receivers. He only plays 23% of snaps out of the slot. It's more Judy, more Elijah Moore in the slot role. So Amari Cooper, not as great of a matchup as this says. I should fix that and put him over on outside receivers only. But still not horrible, obviously. Next up, Nico Collins. One of my favorite receivers of the week. Obviously, he's been amazing, but then you have to think about there's no Tank Dell. His targets are more valuable because of the air yards, the downfield throws, and the quarterback that's throwing to him. So he's already in this great spot, and the downfield attack is just going to destroy the Jaguars, in my opinion. They're allowing the fourth most explosive pass plays. That is not a shock at all because the man coverage that I talked about. That's what it leads to. Yes, you get more pressure. Yes, you can stop the run better. That's why teams do it. But also, you're playing against CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. Like, I think they're just going to kill him. And the final guy, I think he's my overall wide receiver one of the week, which sounds crazy to say, and it shouldn't even. But it's Marvin Harrison Jr., and he's going against Washington. Like, there's no really, it's not hard. McBride is going to be out. That's his biggest competition for targets. In Washington, last year, they're 22.4 points per game worse compared to the average this season. So you math that out, and if you take Marr's first 3 weeks, even including his horrible week 1, and the Commanders' first 3 weeks, he would be getting 27 points against the Commanders this week. And now he's going to even have better volume, maybe. He was number 1 in receiver volume last week. So that's what I would expect. You got one side, you got St. Juste, one of the worst corners in the NFL. The other side, the outside corner is now Sainristil, who was a slot corner at Michigan. He was an incredible slot corner at Michigan. And I don't know why they're playing him outside. I don't get it. The main reason I pointed out is because Marv is massive and Sainristil is 5'9", 180. Like, he belongs on the inside and they're playing him outside. I don't get it. Marv, if I could bet on anybody this week, I would say Marv is the guy that's going to be the overall wide receiver one. Matchup, talent, volume, quarterback. He's got it all. Should be a shootout for Washington, Arizona. I will be watching that game for sure. If you guys like this video, like and subscribe. If you guys didn't, leave some hate comments below and I won't answer. See you guys soon.